restrict and control because there's a lot of other things on the president's agenda, policymakers' agenda. So if they form a bigger coalition, they can raise their image and attract more attention to this kind of specific issue.
Okay, so definitely they could increase visibility just by coming together.
For me, it goes back to what you originally said about how they get funded, and in the case of the higher education institutions, the group that funds the funders, which is, the student body, is actually, there's a lot of crossover. So, if you really follow the money down to where it comes from, maybe they're not as much in opposition as it would seem ostensibly.
Okay?
Well, simply, you would definitely have more power, more resources,
Sure.
which will mainly get you a bigger piece of pie, even if you didn't realize this at the beginning. This, in most case scenarios, will happen in the long term.
I think it's been.
I don't think so, not quite.
I mean, we talked about one group's targeting, so your HBCUs would be targeting the Congressional Black Caucus, your Hispanic institutions are targeting the Hispanic caucus,
Right.
and the Asian institutions are targeting that caucus. But if you
Right.
put all of those forces targeting all of those forces, then it makes a.
I am Congressman Becerra, and I got a whole bunch of Hispanics in my district. Do I have any African Americans in my district? Maybe. Right? I don't know, I'm representing someplace in Texas. Do I have an HBCU? Yeah. Am I Hispanic? Yeah, let's say I'm Hispanic. Do I have an HSI? Yeah. Can we all play nice, please? Because if we all come together, then you're asking me to choose, right? You're asking me to choose between the HSIs or the HBCUs or the AHICs. If you come together, I don't have to choose anymore. Now I'm in a position where I can make everybody happy. Congress really likes for you to sort out your little problems before you come to them.
Can I just ask how Native American populations fit into that? Because their geographic patterns are a bit different.
You know, they kind of just benefit from the coalition. They're kind of the hangers-on. They have very limited electoral influence, but having them in the coalition works for the other guys. Because they can say, look, we're all here. We're all together.
Okay.
Do you see how it sort of works both ways?
Yeah. Yeah.
So one interesting thing that seems to be a pattern is that imagine in 1998, you're HSIs, HBCUs, AHACs, and you're fighting and you're not sure sort of who's your friend and who's not. None of you three are gonna come up with the idea to start a coalition. And what's more, if one of you did, the other two would be like, yeah, right. HBCUs want to be in coalition with us only because, they have ulterior motives. So a lot of times what you need is some sort of honest broker. A senator, in this case it was a foundation officer. That's actually pretty common, where a foundation officer will say, you know what, these guys and these guys, they're kind of working on the same thing. Let's put them in a room together. And all of a sudden you have a very different dynamic because you have this sort of outside player who's coming in and saying, just talk to each other. And you'd be amazed how often that actually leads to something. This competition for resources, the autonomy thing doesn't seem to be, in this study as well as other studies, that doesn't seem to be a factor in decision making. And then this last thing about the United Front is what we've already talked about. So how good an idea is it to lobby in coalitions? What the heck, Baumgartner Jones? Huh? Thoughts?
It's the larger something like a coalition gets, the more like underlying faults exist within it, and someone can come in from the opposite side and pick an issue that's divisive within it to toss in, and then the coalition's pretty much broken.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder about that first point though, if they're not as successful also because they're formed around issues that are really, really tough, like ending hunger.
Exactly. Yep. So a lot of times, you can see that a coalition is maybe, it's either a sort of a last-ditch effort, or it's, they're strategically, they're not actually planning on getting what they want. But they have some sort of midterm, sort of interim goals, just to bring attention to something, or, sort of move the needle a little bit. And then the other thing that I wonder about with this is, in the death tax example, depends on who you asked if they were successful or not, right?
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Success has to be defined. So
Right.
with something that might be rhetoric, which was how maybe the transition from estate tax to death tax, that's the fissures of that coalition are gonna be far more easy to exploit than if it's something much more fundamental, like keep your hands off my guns. Like, it's harder to get people to disagree about that, even if it's a Fortune 500 company versus an individual, because ultimately they both benefit equally from keeping their hands off my guns, so.
Right. The other thing that, there's a good recent book on lobbying that talks about the success of lobbying efforts in private goods versus public goods, and also the different strategies that different kinds of lobbyists will use. So for example, if I am representing a group of corporations who want some sort of tax fix, right? So this is, is this a private good or a public good?
Oh,
It's a private good.
tax fix?
It's only gonna help this particular group of people. It's like the Farm Bill, right? These people benefit, these people pay, right? So it's a private good. So it's a private good, and then how are they likely to lobby? What kind of lobbying are they gonna do? Bill, are you in the lobbying class? Have you gotten here yet? My class is bad. What kind of lobbying are they gonna do?
I would say find a way to market it to other individuals other than just the uber rich. Try to say like, yeah, they'll
Okay,
cutting
so,
taxes for them will help
okay,
job creators.
so
something
a
like that.
la, sort of death tax approach. Are they gonna be real public
No,
with it?
do it under the radar.
Thank you.
If you're creating loopholes, do it quietly.
If you're seeking a private benefit, then you're not gonna be doing some big PR campaign, which means you're probably not gonna be going door to door in Congress either. In fact, you're probably gonna be doing a lot of regulatory lobbying. You're gonna be talking to people in agencies, you're gonna be talking to people, sort of who do the little fine details. Whereas if you are, interested in seeing a huge bill on climate change, who are you? Is that a private good or a public good? It's a public good. You're those big nonprofit advocacy type organizations, right? Universities, all those green groups, all those guys. Public good. And how are you going to lobby? Very publicly.
Effectively.
This is all about, and in fact, that's me. This is all about, sort of constituents and rallying the grassroots and going to members of Congress and doing press conferences, right? Very, very public. So the question of which one of those is more effective, it kind of depends on what your goals are. And it is kind of hard to measure those more public, campaigny type goals.
I'm thinking about, people that lobby for climate change awareness or policy change, or whatever you want to call it. And maybe the problem they run into is not that their strategy is wrong, but really, if something is truly a public good, it's also a public and private good. I mean, it affects more than just, you know, us, it also affects you, and they're failing at translating that. I mean, you can make the same argument about poverty, you know, and its effects are systemic, so therefore, maybe you don't think you're being affected by it, but in fact, it's very private to you. So they need to be on both fronts. It's more expensive. It's a more expensive battle, so to speak.
You mean they need to broaden their coalition? Is that?
Yes. The next slide.
Remember, larger the coalition,
Yeah,
less
it
likely.
can get tricky. If you put coal companies in your coalition, ultimately, they don't want what you want.
Well, that's not where I go first.
So your first, I'll give you a sec to read this. So remember we said we cannot attach the yays and nays to campaign finance. We can't make the connection that, you know, sort of bribery stroke really good lobbying actually leads to results. There is no way pharma would spend as much money as they do on lobbying if they didn't get something out of it. I don't really need correlation.
Can you please educate me a little bit on the whole like regulation issue? Because I feel like I'm a little bit fuzzier than I'll ever be on who kind of is regulating lobbying, like who's really on deck for that.
Which one are
So
you
like
in?
number 4, like the point about being less likely to be detected. Who would the regulators be, like, in that?
Like compared to not lobbying firms, firms that lobby have a smaller hazard rate of being detected or fraud. Oh, but it's not, they're not regulating lobbyists, they're regulating whatever the industry is. It's the industry. So for example, I am XYZ paint company and I don't tend to get in trouble very much. And I also lobby a whole lot.
Okay, talking about the industry.
I'm talking about the industry.
Can I
Who
just
regulates lobbying?
Yeah.
Remember, it's self-reported. So you go to Senate, whatever it is, and you say, hello, I'm a lobbyist, and you fill out a lobby disclosure form. It's not at all onerous, it's just,
But like in the Inglemoff for the delay examples, like that would have been, who were the police there?
the,
feds were.
yeah, judiciary.
Judiciary.
Yeah.
So it's incumbent on a DA at like what level?
Yeah, so for example, William Jefferson, that was FBI.
Okay.
You know, so it sort of depends on what is happening. I would guess that defrauding those Indian tribes, there were a couple people involved, but definitely FBI would have been involved.
Yeah, it's different, right? It's not like
Yeah.
there's just one.
But definitely Department of Judiciary, Department of Justice.
So like the DOJ is looking at the shuck on the top
Right,
right now.
Okay.
right.
The tricky thing about the feds is that like once they're sniffing around, they don't go away. Like they will find something.
So at the end of the day, how many of us are okay with lobbying? Does it make you a little nervous, or is it actually really just part of our system?
And I'm still okay with it.
You're okay with it? Why is that?
I mean, I think part of the reasons that I mentioned before, we need that expertise, and these people have that expertise. I think it's,
But you would argue lobbyists are not the problem. The members of Congress or the staff who are who are influenced inappropriately are the problem.
We elect too many lawyers, not professionals that actually have expertise in a certain field.
Oh, here we go.
okay, but then those people have to work in other fields, and so it's like,
Right, do it, really? Does every member of Congress need to have been a teacher?
No, my point, we brought it up earlier, just talking about voting for, I mean, it's a lot more explicit to vote for things we care about if the person, instead of saying they care about it, actually has proven through a life's work or through years of experience that they actually care about it. Also, I went to the restroom, I just have a question. Did we talk about if this is just correlated, or if there's some sort of causal arrangement? Because you can make the argument for like 2 and 3 that just better, more profitable companies are gonna do this. So there's no,
Right, correlation is not causation.
nothing about this says that it actually works.
That is correct. Anybody else? How many of us are totally okay with our system, which involves lobbying Congress when we feel we have something to say? Totally okay with that? Totally okay with that? Okay, if you're not okay with it, why?
Oh no, well, I do have to been convinced that if it's an equal kind of playing field for people that can't afford lobbying, then I think there's some kind of inherent injustice in that.
Okay,
I mean, if someone can explain that.
it's not equal.
I think the part that makes me nervous is how much of it can go unreported, because like we were saying, so much of it is relationship based, like someone saying like, oh, like, by the way, like, you know, you should really consider this job offer, like, sometime in the future, like, it's not an actual offer, but just planting that seed can really influence someone.
So I guess if there are people in our cohort who we know want to run for office, like Dan Vernon, who graduated last year, Mike Keisha wants to run for office. So
Our friend Lucas.
Let's say we all work in our industry or nonprofit or whatever, and they're in a position to help our nonprofit. So we leverage our relationship with them and call them. We're lobbying, but we're not like reporting it as lobbying. Would you be against that, or would you not?
There's no logical connection between that and Big Pharma. I mean, that's.
It's the exact same thing.
No, it's not. That's like saying my slingshot's the same as your A-bomb, because they're both weapons.
But if we're saying that it's based on relationships, are you not going to use your relationship
Well,
to
no,
ask
but
him to
who
do
can
something for you?
who can afford to create the relationships, is the question.
Right. So, for the argument based on they do it for the expertise, if that's what we're, I guess that would be the optimistic view of lobbying, why we need it. Doesn't it, how do you consider that if there's anything that's getting cheaper and easier into the future, it's information and access to it? So if that's the reason why we need lobbyists, it seems like that's one reason it's going to degrade the quickest. Because to your point, there's 3 or 4 LAs on a staff. 30 years ago, yeah, you need experts. I mean,
Oh, it was less than 30 years ago.
I
didn't have internet.
Okay, I understand what you're saying, but I'm talking about moving into
Now.
the future, which way is it trending? Those 3 or 4 LAs 15 years from now are gonna be a lot more effective at getting information they need without another human being than they were 20 years ago. So if that's the argument for lobbying, then that's on the wrong side of history. So in that case, we need a different argument for lobbying, which is making my opinion known.
Okay, so, can someone counter that argument? Because I can, easy.
Like the lobbyists are paying for it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say we're about to do this just in this class, having to like research and compile things, like being able to search through like pages and pages and pages of unlimited data, like that itself is also work. You have to sift through like what's bad, what's accurate, what's completely made up.
So when you have a lobbyist who you know is a specialist, right? When they walk in the door, you are essentially cue taking, right? You're saying, okay, this person knows all of this, so when he tells me this part, I'm going to believe him. I don't need to know all of that.
But that's the, is he a specialist in approving the policy, or is he a specialist in business, in the industry that I am in?
A lobbyist is typically a policy expert. So there are 2 kinds of lobbyists, though increasingly it's the policy expert that's increasingly common. There used to be a category of lobbyists that was basically the relationship guy, right? So he'd be the guy you called, the Republican convention is happening, member of Congress calls up this guy and says, you know what, I hear this is a great party, can you get me tickets for it? Literally, it's the relationships. Oh, you got a golf thing going on? Yeah, great, let's do that. I knew a lobbyist who was a scratch golfer. Do you know what that means? Basically, he every time he gets the ball in the hole. Why is that important?
Because people love golf and scratch golf.
Because, and then you get to be on the lobbyist gets to be on this member of Congress's team, because the member of Congress wants to win the trophy, and you get 3 hours or however long it takes to play golf to talk to this guy, right? So that's the relationship lobbyist. But then there's the policy expert lobbyist, and that's becoming increasingly common, especially as Congress does less and less in terms of productivity, and that's an argued point. So if it means that you're spending more time in the regulatory, sort of aisles, do you know what I mean? Like going and making little tweaks to policy, you need somebody who really knows what they're doing.
Okay, so here in America, I'm guessing that, of course, but I want to ask. So if I'm a businessman, I need some policy. Who do I go to? I go to lobbyists only, or I go direct to the congressman? Listen, here what's going on, this is what I need. Because businessmen, like the private sector, of course, talks with the government to explain policy, or this is only done through lobbyists.
It depends on the business, and it depends on who's running the business, and it depends on what their philosophy is, and it depends on their relationship with their local member of Congress. If they play golf with their local member of Congress, they go to them directly. But if they need someone to be intermediary, if they don't really know how government works, and all of a sudden they have this problem, they're going to hire a lobbyist.
So can you think lobbying is a kind of freedom of speech by constitution? Because we can express our opinion through the lobbyists.
Of course. Sure. It's a way for your concerns to be heard. You're just using some sort of intermediary. And the other thing is a member of a business might not hire a lobbyist directly, but they might be part of an association, right? So if you pay into so-and-so association, they got a lobbyist on staff.
Yeah, but many times you go with your lobbyist to the congressman to explain.
Many times you don't. Many times you're just part of this huge association and you have common interests, and that lobbyist takes care of your common interests.
Okay. Just for the record, lobbyist is a bad word where I come from.
Lobbyist is a bad word here.
But I mean, like,
No, well, and that's why I said the numbers are going down. The number of registered lobbyists are going down, and nobody wants to call themselves a lobbyist these days. I have to say, it used to be, public relations seemed to be the word people were using, and then it was strategic relations. First it was strategic relations, and now it's strategic communications, and there's another one that I just heard. Is it strategic consulting? Anyway, and, so yeah, everyone's trying to find a way to not say lobbyist.
yeah, but I mean, we don't have this job lobbyist there.
Right.
For the record.
Well, here's an important point about the American system. Why do we have so many lobbyists? Anybody know? Because we have a lot of lobbyists. Compared to other places, special interest, private sector has a lot of influence in our policymaking process. Why might that be?
Because we create policy on something that others.
Yes, but other people do too. It's because you have to think a little bit more, it's like thinking about the Hispanics and the blacks and sort of being in these districts. You have to think about the mechanics of this a little bit. It's because of there are so many points of access, right? You might have hearings at the subcommittee level, and then they're going to mark up a bill, and then you got hearings at the committee level, and they're going to mark up a bill, and then you got the agency that you can talk to, and then you have the House and the Senate that you can talk to. So there are a lot of different places where you can stick something in, and so those are opportunities. Where in other places it doesn't work that way. So that's why, in some ways, we have so much. One reason why we have so much private sector influence in policy.
Would another reason be because there are a lot of interests here in the state, since it's a lot of foreigners, a lot of people coming from different backgrounds, a lot of, I would call it, collusions, if you want to call it.
That sounds bad.
Yeah, this is what I
I think
expect.
that's probably true of a lot of places. But the system just sort of allows for more varied places of entrance, essentially.
Yeah, I would guess also because the States is one of the, if not the most country who contributes all people around the world, a lot of diversity here. So maybe this could play, I'm guessing.
Isn't it also a little more fundamental, like how you're in the United States, the primacy of capital and the myth of the American dream? Like the fact that we're all talking about lobbying and defending it as freedom of speech is insane because
Sure.
I don't have a lobbyist. So we're buying into, and like even you're talking about coalitions and minority coalitions, I mean, we saw the list of how much money goes in by industry, and I'm not part of the pharma
Americans
coalition.
are much more willing to accept the private sector's influence in policymaking than a lot of other places. This would not be okay in a lot of other places. Yeah. So see, public opinion does matter. If you want more information on campaign finance, you can go there. Okay, so what I want you to do, you can look at Open Secrets or you can look at this other Vancouver site. Try and just take a few minutes to figure out who lobbies in your issue area. Is there a ton of money in your issue area, or is it not? And then are there sort of natural coalitions, or does it not look that way at all? And in the meantime, I'm going to go around and talk to people about the scope of their policy arena. If anybody is having trouble with that, I'll lay that out. Okay? You won't be happy about what I have to say. But. All right.
So,
Yeah.
On 3K.
I think we're all struck.
Where do we start? You want to start with the legend?
Different thing.